All right. We are blessed today to have someone who fills our
Before we get down to the business of what I'm talking about, I need to have a serious talk with Richard. Last time I spoke, he made me cry by singing a Celtic song. What he doesn't know is that a child in Wales about this high, I used to sing that song. How can I keep from singing? Yes. And I'm sitting there trying not to cry as I remember the Welsh choir of children singing at the Eisteddfod on the 1st of March. That song.
We didn't know you were that old.
You have no idea how old I am. Right, Brian? Okay, let's get serious. Am I on? Okay. When Reverend Brian told us that the topic for the month was grief and loss, everything in me went, no. It was true that I had company coming this weekend. It was true that this was not, at that time, a good Sunday for me to talk. But in the end, I decided to go ahead anyway, because it meant Mother's Day, and my kids said no. And he always says, if you are moved to change the subject, please go ahead. But also something in me knew that I wasn't going to change the subject. And it innately knew that I needed to do this. You know, grief is a natural response to loss. Emotional suffering when someone or something is taken away. We may experience shock, anger, disbelief, guilt, or a profound sadness. What are the reasons for grief? Well, we know death of a loved one, of a friend, of a pet. Divorce or loss of a friendship. Physical or mental trauma. Financial loss. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. There's no normal timetable for grieving. For some people, it takes months. And for some people, it takes years. And it's important to honor what it is that we need, to honor ourselves, to allow ourselves the process, to let the process unfold as we need it to, naturally. You know, there's myths about grieving. One of them is the pain will go away faster if you ignore it. In the long run, this only makes it worse. We need to face our grief and actively deal with it. It's important to be strong in the face of loss. Crying is not a sign of weakness. Crying is the ability to release that pent-up pain that feels like it's going to explode inside. We don't need to protect anyone else by putting on a brave front. Showing our true feelings can help them and ourselves. Another myth, if you don't cry, you're not mourning the loss. Crying isn't the only response to grief and to sadness. Sorrow manifests in other ways. I can speak to this one specifically When my children's father died, my daughter was 11 years old, and she lost her soulmate. There were times when I wished it had been me that had gone because she missed her father so much. But one of her aunts said, well, Julie doesn't seem to be too sorry about her dad. We never see her crying. I'm not often lost for words, but I was lost for words because I knew this person would not understand what I tried to explain to her. But that for me was a very personal example of that myth. Moving on with your life means that you've forgotten about the loss. Moving on with life means that you've accepted the loss and you're not forgetting it. You're accepting it even as you move forward. And as we integrate the loving memories into our lives, we expand and grow into the people that we are today, because nobody touches our life without it enhancing, changing, touching something within us. You know, we can choose how we deal with the grieving process. When we choose to get stuck in negativity, and it is a choice to get stuck in negativity, to simply decide we're going to hole up in this place of pain, we must then accept the impact of what that negativity is going to do have on our lives. And when we make the decision to overcome, to positively approach the loss, we are then refusing to allow this to drag us down. But these are choices. I'd like to tell you the story about a man named Kevin Myers. He lost his wife, Jennifer, in 2017 to breast cancer. And after the initial shock and after a period of time, he partnered with his sister Christine to transform their grief into action. So they created a business where they could raise funds for others needing cancer treatments. They opened the Ribbon Cafe in Bellston Spa, New York. And the motto of the cafe was, help us help others, one meal at a time. Last June, they helped raise $10,000 for a veteran and firefighter who was battling cancer. In July, they hosted a lemonade stand to raise funds for a 3-year-old with a rare form of cancer. They partner with a local oncology unit to raise money to provide extra necessities to patients who are in treatment. They donate money monthly to local cancer organizations. And when asked, they deliver meals free meals delivered free to cancer patients. Kevin and Christine are allowing their grief to become a catalyst for aiding others who need these ways of being helped, lifting them and providing some of the support that they need during probably one of the most trying times of their lives. You know, tragedy strikes, and often we don't understand why. And while we know at a basic level that life must end, it's like we don't understand why now. And this is one of the most difficult things for us as in this human eggshell. One of the most difficult things for us to deal with is the uncertainty. And we ask the why. But But we do have a choice how we channel our grief. And Kevin and Christine chose to make Jennifer's death a catalyst for aiding those in the community with cancer, for providing support at a most trying time. We don't always know when those around us are grieving. We don't know their story, which is why we never should take it personally when someone's behavior seems less than complimentary to us. It's not about us, it's about them. And one of the most challenging is post-traumatic stress disorder. You know, it's only fairly recently that has come out, really talked about. Those who experience this are expected by society to return to a normal life without complication. I'd like to tell you the story of a man named Christopher Tafoya. In 2003, Christopher Tafoya returned from Iraq, seriously wounded, physically and emotionally. After the physical wounds healed, he was transferred to the Old Guard in Washington, D.C. That's the part of the Army, the brigade in the Army that does all the ceremonial stuff where we see soldiers involved. No one in the hospital had ever talked to Chris about post-traumatic stress disorder. And he struggled, but he didn't share. Loud noises, fast moves, crowds of people, he'd lose his equilibrium and his composure. He went to a mall shortly after if someone took him as a treat to the mall, he lasted 3 minutes and had to go back to his car. He was talking to a friend in Washington, D.C., and he heard the clip-clop of hooves. And the friend told him that was the caisson platoon, those that took part in funerals and carried the coffin on the caisson. And as Chris watched and listened to the sound of the hooves, he felt his heart move into a normal rhythm and slow down. And he knew intuitively that he was to work with those horses. 1 year later, he was transferred to the caisson platoon at his request, but it took a year. He threw himself into training. He would be the first one in the stables cleaning up in the morning, the first one to greet the horses. And the biggest horse in the platoon, 17 hands high, bigger than any of the others, named Klinger.
What?
I don't hear.
Attached himself.
Well, then you don't have the sound
Whenever
on.
he saw
Or you don't have your volume turned up or
would
something.
come
That's
up
probably it.
and stand with him. The first time Christopher rode Klinger, he felt an exhilaration and a relaxation that he had not felt for a very long time. And something in him said, "You're going to be okay, Tafoya." He liked the other guys in the unit, but they didn't understand. They hadn't been in combat. He couldn't open up to them. One day, sitting on the corral fence after everyone else had left, Klinger came up behind him and stood there with his head at the side of Christopher. And Christopher said to the horse, "Everyone thinks I'm all right, but I'm not. How can I continue in the army when loud noises and crowds freak me out?" He told Klinger about the reason he was awarded a Purple Heart. protecting a group of children from a grenade attack, of the little girl who died, and of the other children who were injured. He told him everything, everything. It was like a valve inside him had been released, and the pressure was relieved. And he laughed at it himself, and he said, I'm talking to a horse. But the horse was the best listener. The day of his first funeral at Arlington, he got up early, went down to the stables, threw his arms around Klinger's neck. Horses had been trained not to respond to crowds and loud noises. And Chris wondered if he could do the same, because his career in the army depended on it. They moved through their part of the ceremony, and he knew what was coming next, the 3-rifle volley. He kept his focus on Klinger. He breathed deeply with each boom as it reverberated through the cemetery. He felt the same peace that he'd felt when he'd first heard the clip-clop of the horse's hooves. And he allowed that peace to keep him calm. And he knew that with Klinger and with the one who had brought them together, the divine presence that had brought them together, that he would be okay. He knew he had a long way to go. He was thinking on it as he washed Klinger down in the stables. But he knew that he had the support that he needed to get where he needed to go. There's a postscript to that story. Move forward to 2018, when Senator John McCain died and was buried in a cemetery, in a ceremony at the Naval Academy that's in Annapolis. And they had never done a ceremony there. They were always done at Arlington. And the horses had to cross a bridge. Horses don't like crossing bridges. And what they didn't know is that the streets were going to be lined with cadets all dressed in white. To a horse, that could look like anything. White moving things down the side of the road. But he felt they had trained and were ready for it. But as he turned to go across the bridge to start the procession, he felt Klinger freeze. And he stopped. And he went, please God, don't let him buck now. He let the peace in his own body move into Klinger, and Klinger relaxed and started the procession across the bridge. As the cadets all saluted as one, the motion once again froze Klinger. But again, he started and continued the ceremony. And Christopher realized he'd been given this incredible opportunity to calm Klinger in the same way as Klinger had calmed him and changed his life. That story almost brings me to tears. Christopher was blessed to recognize the divine involved in his meeting Klinger and his healing. He was blessed to recognize that he was meant to work with horses. And he had his self-awareness and his courage and the support of his four-legged companion. He faced and overcame his grief. He chose to cross the bridge. from grief to peace. And by the way, the title of my talk today is Crossing the Bridge. As we move through life, can we always identify our emotional conditions? Haven't you ever found yourself tearing up or being agitated and you don't know why? You don't know, why am I like this? We can't always identify it. We're aware of emotional triggers. We know we're upset, but we don't know why. Well, now I'm going to tell you my story. In 1997, I went to a retreat in Oakhurst, California. The leaders of the retreat had come to the church in Arroyo Grande, at which I was active, and spoken to us, and I was drawn to attend the retreat. I went alone from here, and I don't remember there weren't many of us. There were just enough of us to be staying in someone's home, the home of a participant. And I think no more than 5 or 6 of us. And it was an emotional clarity retreat. It was a Thursday through Sunday. And on Saturday morning, the leader gave assignments to everyone, each one individually, of what he wanted them to accomplish between then and meeting on Sunday. He turned to me. I didn't think I was ever going to tell this story. He turned to me and he said, "Jan, I want you to write a letter to your mother." My first thought was, oh God, how did he know? Everyone else went out to dinner that night. I'm not a moviegoer particularly, and I knew I had work to do. So they all left to go to dinner and a movie. And I stayed in the house alone, my hostess lovingly leaving me a meal. After dinner, I made myself comfortable and I started to write. Now, 2 weeks after my birth, my mother was placed in a sanitarium. She died when I was 4 years old. I have very fleeting memories of her presence. Basically, I had no close personal relationship with her. She was just a name and just a presence. When she was allowed to come home a time or two, it was just a presence. I didn't have a mother. I was raised by aunts, nannies, whoever was available to raise my sister and I. Until my stepmother came, and I've told you about her, and we're not going to go back there. Except one day when something was said about my mother, and I started to tear up, she looked at me and said, "What's the matter with you? You didn't know her." I left home at 16. I'd stuffed all the emotions about my mother, and I got on with my life. But once I started to write, all the stuff I had wanted to say came pouring out. All the grief, all the love, all the longing came pouring out onto the paper. I cried, I sobbed, and I wrote. And when I was done, I was calm and exhausted. But then I reached for the pad of paper again. Without realizing it, I started to write again. And this time, I wrote a letter from my mother to me. all the things I'd ever wanted to hear from her, all of the longing, all of the explaining, everything was in that letter. That night was a critical turning point for me. That night changed my life to that point. For the first time ever, I recognized my emotional sadness as grief. I was able to honor the woman who had given me life, to express gratitude for her love and courage, and truly thank her for whatever gift she had passed on to me. And tomorrow is Memorial Day, and I'm going to invite you to carve out some time to be still, to reflect on your sense of who you are, of where you've been and who you've been there with. Take a moment to write down the names of people who have shaped your life, for better or for worse. Express gratitude for the memories and the lessons. Write down what proactive, life-affirming choices you can make for your life and for the future of all life. Not only for yourself, but for all of the generations to come. Namaste.